They mock and pour a drink on the black waitress at the bar, unaware she's the Korean mafia boss's wife. At 11:23 p.m. on a Thursday night in Washington, D.C., my dignity became public entertainment. The upscale bar near the Wharf was the kind of place where Capitol Hill staffers unwound after long days, where Georgetown lawyers closed deals over $30 cocktails, where the lighting was low enough to feel intimate but bright enough to see who mattered. I was clearing glasses from a corner table when the red wine hit my face. Not a splash, a pour. Deliberate, slow. The Merlot ran down my forehead, into my eyes, soaking through my white shirt and black apron. The glass was still tilted when the laughter started, loud, performative, the kind meant to pull others in. 3 men at the table, all in their 30s, all dressed like they'd never heard the word no in their lives. One woman beside them, her phone already out, recording. "Oh my God," the woman said, her voice carrying that practiced mix of shock and delight. "Did you just—" "What?" said the man who'd poured the wine, his smile wide. "I asked for a refill. She wasn't listening." He looked directly at me, his eyes scanning my face, my soaked shirt, the way my hand instinctively went to my stomach. "Maybe she'll pay attention now." I stood frozen. The wine dripped from my chin onto the polished concrete floor. Around the room, conversations had stopped. Phones were out. The bartender was staring. The hostess had her hand over her mouth. No one moved to help. "Should have stayed in the kitchen," one of the other men muttered, loud enough for the neighboring tables to hear. The woman with the phone giggled. I looked down at my hands. They were shaking. I thought about the shift I still had 3 hours left on. I thought about the doctor's appointment I had tomorrow. I thought about how tired I was, how my feet ached, how I'd smiled through worse than this and would probably have to smile through worse again. But I didn't cry, not there, not in front of them. I turned and walked toward the back, leaving a trail of wine drops behind me like breadcrumbs in a story that had just begun. What none of them knew, what the man with the empty glass and his laughing friends and the woman still recording couldn't possibly imagine, was that I had a name that meant something to someone who made people disappear for less. Before we begin, please take a moment to support this channel by clicking the like, share, and subscribe button so you can keep enjoying stories like this. Thank you. The video was online within 7 minutes. At Brooke Kensington posted it to her Instagram story first, then Twitter, then TikTok with the caption, "When service is that bad Skullwine DC nightlife hash entitled." By midnight, it had 4,000 views. By 1:00 a.m., 40,000. The algorithm loved outrage, and outrage was what this was. In the bar's cramped back hallway, I stood in front of a spotted mirror trying to clean wine out of my hair with paper towels. My manager, Eric, a 40-something man who always wore the same tired expression, leaned against the doorframe with his arms crossed. "You need to go home," he said, but it wasn't kindness. It was liability. "I need the hours," I said quietly, still scrubbing at a stain on my collar. "Tandy, look at you. You can't go back out there like that." "Then let me change shirts. I've got—" "It's not about the shirt." Eric sighed, rubbed his eyes. "Those guys at table 12, you know who they are." I didn't. One of them works for a senator. Another one's dad owns half of CityCenterDC. I can't have. "Can't have what?" I turned to face him now, my voice still soft but with an edge he'd never heard before. "Can't have your staff humiliated. Can't have customers who think they can do whatever they want because they have money." "That's not what I'm saying." "Then what are you saying, Eric?" He looked away. That was answer enough. I pulled my apron off, hung it on the hook by the door, and walked out through the back exit into the October cold. I didn't have a coat. I'd left it in my locker, and I wasn't going back inside. The air bit into my damp skin as I stood on the curb, trying to decide if I had enough for an Uber or if I'd have to take the metro. My phone buzzed. A text from a coworker, "Girl, are you okay? That video is everywhere." Another buzz. A DM on Instagram from someone I didn't know. "You probably deserved it." Another. "This is what happens when DEI hires don't know their place." I turned my phone face down. Across the street, a black Mercedes sedan idled at the curb. The windows were tinted dark enough that I couldn't see inside, but I could feel someone watching. It had been there when I came outside. I told myself it was nothing. This was D.C., black Mercedes sedans were as common as pigeons, but something in my chest tightened anyway. The back door opened. A man stepped out. Tall, lean, dressed in a perfectly tailored charcoal suit that probably cost more than I made in 3 months. He was Korean, somewhere in his 30s or 40s, his hair swept back, his face unreadable. He looked at me the way you'd look at a painting in a museum, with focus, with care, like nothing else in the world existed. "Tandy," he said, and it wasn't a question. I took a step back. Who are you?" "Someone who's been looking for you for a very long time." He glanced at the bar behind me, then back at my face, at the wine still damp in my hair. His jaw tightened just barely, but I saw it. "You should come with me." "I'm not going anywhere with you." "I'm not asking you to trust me," he said calmly. "I'm telling you that in about 90 seconds, someone from that bar is going to walk out here, probably to make sure you're not causing problems. And when they see you standing here, cold and humiliated, they'll feel better about themselves. I'm offering you the option to not be here when that happens." I stared at him. He stared back. There was something in his eyes that wasn't cruelty or pity. It was something older, something patient. "Who are you?" I asked again, quieter this time. "My name is Namjayu," he said, "and you're my wife." If this moment hit you, subscribe now. Stories like this only get deeper. 6 months earlier, I had been a different version of myself. I'd been a senior at Georgetown, studying social work, living in a tiny apartment in Kalorama with 2 roommates who never cleaned the kitchen. I worked part-time at a bookstore near DuPont Circle, the kind with floor-to-ceiling shelves and a cat that slept on the register. I liked my life in a quiet, unassuming way. I liked walking through the city at dusk when the monuments glowed. I liked the anonymity of being 21 in a city full of people too busy to notice you. I met Namjayu on a Tuesday in March, outside the bookstore. He'd been standing on the sidewalk staring at the window display, a collection of translated Korean poetry, with an expression I couldn't quite read. I'd been taking my break, drinking bad coffee from a paper cup, when he turned and asked me in perfect English if the store carried a specific title. I'd helped him find it. We talked for 11 minutes. He'd asked my name. I told him. He'd smiled just barely and said, "That's a beautiful name. It means beloved in Zulu, doesn't it?" I'd been surprised he knew that. Most people weren't. We'd met for coffee 3 days later. Dinner the week after that. He never told me what he did for a living, and I never pushed. I assumed he was in finance, maybe international business, something that explained the tailored suits, the way he moved through the world like he owned invisible real estate everywhere he went. He was older than anyone I'd ever dated. He was careful with me in a way that felt both protective and unsettling. He asked questions about my life, my family, my dreams, and then he listened like my answers mattered more than anything else in the world. By May, I loved him. By June, I'd moved into his penthouse apartment overlooking the Potomac. By July, I was pregnant. We'd gotten married at the courthouse in August. No family, no friends, just the 2 of us and a judge who stamped the papers without looking up. Jayu had held my hand the entire time, his thumb tracing circles on my palm, and when the judge said, "You may kiss," he'd leaned in and whispered, "You'll never have to be alone again." I'd believed him. But then things shifted. He started traveling more Tokyo, Seoul, Los Angeles, cities I'd never been to. He'd be gone for days, sometimes a week, and when he came back, he was different. Quieter, more distant. He still touched me gently, still asked about the baby, still made sure I had everything I needed, but something had changed. I felt it in the spaces between his words, in the way his phone buzzed at 2 a.m. and he'd leave the room to answer. I'd asked him once, late at night when we were lying in bed, "What do you actually do, Jayu?" He'd been silent for a long time. Then, "I make sure people keep their promises." "What does that mean?" "It means you're safe. It means no one will ever hurt you." But I had been hurt. Not by him, by the world he wasn't part of. By the bar patrons who saw a pregnant black waitress and thought they could pour wine on my head for sport. By the manager who cared more about rich customers than my dignity. By a city that promised opportunity but delivered humiliation. I'd taken the waitressing job 2 months ago because Jayu had been gone for 3 weeks, and I was tired of sitting in the apartment alone, tired of feeling like a secret he kept locked away. I'd told him I wanted to work, wanted to feel useful. He'd looked at me for a long time, then nodded. "If that's what you need," he'd said. But he'd made me promise to call him if anything happened. Anything at all. I hadn't called him tonight. I deleted his number from my favorites weeks ago in a fit of frustration, buried it somewhere in my contacts under a name I couldn't quite remember now. I told myself it didn't matter. I didn't need saving. I'd survived worse than public humiliation. Except I hadn't, not really. This was a new kind of pain, the kind witnessed, recorded, shared, the kind that didn't wash out. Now, standing in the cold outside the bar, staring at the man who claimed to be my husband, the man who was my husband, I realized with a jolt. I felt something crack open inside my chest. "You've been watching me," I said. "Every night you work," Jayu admitted. "From the car, I know you wanted space. I was trying to respect that, but I've been here." "Why didn't you come inside?" His expression didn't change, but something in his eyes did. "Because you asked me not to interfere with your life. You said you needed to do this on your own." "And now?" "Now," he said softly, "I don't care what you asked for. No one treats you like that. Not while I'm breathing." Inside the bar, the 3 men were still laughing. I didn't know their names then. I'd learn them later, when everything unraveled. But in that moment, they were just faces. Entitled faces attached to expensive clothes and the kind of confidence that comes from never being told no. The one who'd poured the wine, Garrett Ashford, I'd find out, leaned back in his chair with the satisfied grin of someone who'd just won a bet. His friends, Owen and Brett, were scrolling through Brooke's video on their phones, watching the view count climb. "Dude, you're viral," Owen said, turning his screen around. Garrett glanced at it, shrugged. "Good. Maybe she'll think twice next time she decides to be slow." "You're an asshole," Brooke said, but she was smiling. She'd already reposted the video 3 more times with different captions, each one more inflammatory than the last. Her follower count had jumped by 2,000 in the last hour. Outrage was currency, and she'd just struck gold. "She was rude," Brett added, flagging down another server. A different one this time, a white girl in her early 20s who approached the table like she was walking into a minefield. "We asked her twice for refills. She ignored us." That was a lie. I'd been at their table 3 times in the past hour. They'd been rude from the moment they sat down, snapping their fingers for service, making comments about how long everything took, speaking to me like I was invisible until they needed something. But I knew how this worked. Their version of events would become the truth because they had the platform, the followers, the social capital to make people believe them. I was just a waitress, just a pregnant black girl trying to make rent. Who was going to believe me? What they didn't know, what none of them could possibly imagine, was that I wasn't alone. I'd never been alone. I just hadn't realized it yet. At 12:47 a.m., a man in a black suit walked into the bar and spoke quietly to Eric. They stepped into the back office. The door closed. 3 minutes later, Eric came back out, his face pale, and walked directly to table 12. "Gentlemen," he said, his voice tight, "I'm going to need you to settle your tab and leave." I learned about this later, but I wish I could have seen their faces. The confusion, the indignation, the slow realization that something had shifted in a way they didn't understand. "Excuse me," Garrett said. "Now, please." "We're not done." "Yes, you are." Eric wasn't looking at them. He was looking past them, at the man in the black suit who was now standing near the entrance, hands folded in front of him, waiting. "This is ridiculous," Brett said, standing up. "We're paying customers, that girl was." "That girl is gone," Eric interrupted. "You need to leave now." Garrett stood too, pulling out his wallet. "Fine, this place is trash anyway." He threw 200s on the table and walked toward the exit with Owen and Brett following. Brooke trailed behind, still recording. The man in the black suit stepped aside to let them pass, but as Garrett walked by, he said something so quietly that only Garrett heard it. "You made a mistake tonight." Garrett stopped, turned. "What did you just say?" The man smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. "You'll understand soon." In the car, I sat in silence. Jayu had given me his jacket, Armani, cashmere-lined, still warm from his body, and I'd wrapped it around myself like armor. The driver, a man I didn't recognize, hadn't said a word since we'd pulled away from the curb. Classical music played softly through the speakers, something orchestral and sad. "Where are we going?" I finally asked. "Home," Jayu said. He was sitting beside me, close but not touching, his gaze fixed on the city lights sliding past the window. "I have a shift tomorrow." "No, you don't." "Jayu, you're done with that place." His voice was calm, but there was steel underneath. "You're never going back there." I should have argued. I should have told him he couldn't make that decision for me. But I was so tired, and the jacket smelled like him, like cedar and smoke and something indefinable that had always made me feel safe, and I didn't have the energy to fight. "They recorded it," I said after a while. "The whole thing, it's online." "I know." "People are saying terrible things." "I know." "And you're just, what, going to make it go away?" He turned to look at me then, and in the dim light of the passing street lamps, I saw something in his face that I'd never seen before. Not anger, not rage, something colder. "I'm going to make sure it never happens again," he said. I wanted to ask what that meant. I wanted to ask how he'd found me, how he'd known where I was, why he'd been watching from a car instead of coming inside. I wanted to ask 1,000 questions, but instead I said, "I didn't call you." "I know." "I should have." "Yes," he said softly, "you should have." We drove through Georgetown, past the row houses with their glowing windows and expensive cars parked on cobblestone streets. We crossed Key Bridge, the Potomac black and glittering below. The city looked different from inside this car, softer, more distant, like a postcard of a place I used to know. When we pulled up to the apartment building, the doorman opened my door before I could reach for the handle. He nodded at me, said, "Good evening, Mrs. Nam," like he'd been expecting me. Inside, the apartment was exactly as I'd left it 3 months ago when I'd packed a bag and moved into the cramped studio above the bar. The furniture was the same. The art on the walls, the view of the river. But it felt different now, like a stage set for a life I'd tried to walk away from. "I'll make tea," Jayu said, disappearing into the kitchen. I stood in the living room, still wearing his jacket, still smelling like wine. On the coffee table, there was a photograph I didn't remember seeing before, Jayu and me on our wedding day, standing on the courthouse steps. I was smiling in it. So was he. We looked happy. I picked up the frame, studied my own face. That version of myself felt like a stranger now. When Jayu came back with 2 cups of tea, he sat beside me on the couch and waited. He was good at waiting. It was one of the things that had drawn me to him, his patience, the way he never rushed me, never demanded more than I was willing to give. "I wanted to prove I didn't need you," I said finally. "I know. I wanted to show that I could take care of myself." "You can." "Then why do I feel like I failed?" He set his tea down, turned to face me fully. "You didn't fail, Tandy. They did. The world did, not you." But I just stood there. I let them. "You survived. That's not weakness. That's strength." He reached out, gently touched the side of my face where the wine had dried sticky and dark. "You've always been stronger than you think." I closed my eyes, leaned into his hand. "What are you going to do?" "What I should have done a long time ago," he said. "I'm going to show them who you are." If you're still watching, you already know this is different. Subscribe now. You'll want to see how this ends. Hit that like button and share this story. By Friday morning, the video had 1.2 million views. I didn't watch it. I couldn't. But Jayu told me it had been picked up by a local news blog, then by WTOP, then by a Twitter account that specialized in exposing Karens and Kens. The headline on the Washington City paper's website read, "Georgetown bar patrons mock pregnant black server in viral video." NBC4 Washington ran a segment during their morning show. The bar's Yelp page had been bombarded overnight with 1-star reviews. Their Instagram comments were a war zone. Someone had started a petition to have their liquor license revoked. But that was just noise. Surface-level outrage that would fade by Monday when the next scandal broke. What mattered was happening behind closed doors. And I didn't learn about it until later, when Jayu sat me down and explained, calmly and methodically, what he'd set in motion. At 9:15 a.m., Garrett Ashford's boss called him into his office. The door closed. The conversation lasted 6 minutes. When Garrett walked out, his face was the color of old paper. At 9:47 a.m., Owen Chen received an email from his building's property management company, informing him that his lease would not be renewed due to conduct violations. At 10:03 a.m., Brett's father got a phone call from a lawyer he'd never heard of, asking very specific questions about a property deal that had happened 3 years ago. At 10:30 a.m., Brooke Kensington's Instagram account was permanently suspended. No explanation, no warning, just gone. Her Twitter went down an hour later. Then TikTok. By noon, she was digitally erased. None of them connected these events yet. They were still isolated incidents, frustrating but manageable. At 2:34 p.m., Garrett's credit cards stopped working, all of them. At 3:10 p.m., Owen's car was towed from his reserved parking spot. At 4:55 p.m., Brett received a certified letter from the D.C. Bar Association, informing him that a complaint had been filed against him for ethical violations. By evening, they were all texting each other, trying to piece together what was happening. The consensus was that they were being targeted by an online mob, doxxed, harassed, the usual consequences of going viral for the wrong reasons. What they didn't know was that the man orchestrating all of it hadn't even raised his voice. Jayu made phone calls. He sent emails. He had conversations with people who owed him favors, people who feared him, people who understood that when he asked for something, it wasn't really a request. He did all of this from his apartment, sitting in his study with the door closed while I slept in the next room, exhausted from a night of too many emotions and too little rest. I woke up Saturday afternoon to find him sitting at the dining table with his laptop open, his expression unreadable. "What are you doing?" I asked. He looked up at me, making sure it never happens again. "Jayu, they humiliated you in public, Tandy. They recorded it. They laughed. They made you entertainment." His voice was calm, but there was an edge to it I'd only heard a few times before. "I'm making sure they understand what that costs. I don't want you to hurt anyone." "I'm not hurting anyone." He closed the laptop. "I'm just removing obstacles." By Saturday, the first news story broke. The Washington Post ran a piece titled, "Lobbying Firm Severs Ties with Junior Partner Following Viral Video." Garrett's face was in the article. By Sunday, Brett's law license was under formal review. By Monday morning, Owen's name appeared in a Wall Street Journal article about fraudulent investment schemes. And Brooke discovered that every modeling agency, every PR firm, every influencer management company she'd ever contacted had suddenly, inexplicably, lost interest. They still didn't understand. Not really. They thought this was bad luck, coincidence, the internet's fickle attention span turning against them. But then, on Monday afternoon, each of them received the same message. A text from an unknown number. 3 words. She was loved. I didn't know about the text message until Jayu showed it to me. We were sitting on the balcony, the afternoon sun warm on my face, and he handed me his phone without saying anything. I read the message, she was loved, and felt something cold settle in my stomach. "Did you send this?" I asked. "Yes." "Why?" "Because they need to understand." He took the phone back, set it on the table between us. "They thought you were alone, powerless, someone they could humiliate without consequence. I'm correcting that misunderstanding." I should have felt vindicated, I should have felt protected, but all I felt was tired. "This won't change what happened," I said quietly. "No," he agreed, "but it will change what happens next." Over the next week, I watched from a distance as their lives unraveled. Jayu kept me updated, not because I asked, but because he thought I should know. Garrett lost his job permanently. Owen's career stalled. Brett's law license was suspended. Brooke disappeared from the internet entirely. "They're scared," Jayu told me one evening. "They still don't know who's doing this or why, but they're starting to connect the pieces. And when they figure it out, they already have." He showed me his phone again, another message he'd sent them, longer this time. "You humiliated someone in public because you thought she was powerless. You were wrong. She is not powerless. She is loved. She is protected. And you have made an enemy you cannot afford to have. This is your only warning. Apologize publicly, or what happens next will not be a warning." I read it twice, then handed the phone back. "You're giving them a chance." "I'm giving them a choice." He looked at me. "This was never about revenge, Tandy. It was about consequences, about showing them that actions matter, that people matter, even when they think those people don't." The apologies started coming in on Friday. Garrett posted a video to Twitter first. It was stiff, clearly scripted by a lawyer, but it was something. "I want to sincerely apologize for my actions at the bar that night. What I did was wrong, cruel, and completely unacceptable. I am deeply sorry." Owen posted his own apology an hour later. Then Brett. Then, reluctantly, Brooke. I watched them all. I didn't feel satisfaction. I didn't feel closure. I just felt empty. "They're not sorry," I said to Jayu. "They're scared." "Good," he said. "Fear is honest. Apologies aren't always." But he didn't push further. The messages stopped. The pressure lifted just slightly. Their lives were already destroyed in the ways that mattered: careers, reputations, futures. Making them suffer more wouldn't change what happened to me. Still, I knew Jayu was still watching. That even as things settled, he was keeping tabs, making sure they understood that one moment of cruelty had marked them permanently. I didn't ask for details. I didn't want to know. I just wanted to move forward. This is the moment everything changes. If you haven't subscribed yet, do it now. This story isn't over. The apologies didn't make things go away. They just confirmed what everyone already suspected. The people in the video were guilty, and they knew it. I didn't follow what happened to them closely. Jayu gave me updates, but I tried not to dwell on it. Still, pieces filtered through. Garrett lost his job permanently. Owen's career stalled. Brett's law license was suspended for at least 6 months. Brooke moved to Denver, working retail, far away from cameras and the life she'd tried to build. But the real consequences, the ones that mattered, weren't professional or social. They were internal. Jayu told me that Garrett couldn't sleep anymore. That Owen started having panic attacks. That Brett stopped going outside. That Brooke had tried to reinvent herself 3 times and failed each time because people always found her. They'd all received one final message, 3 weeks after their apologies went live. "You will live with what you did. That is your consequence. Not prison, not bankruptcy, not violence, just the weight of knowing that one moment of cruelty cost you everything you thought made you important. Remember that next time you see someone you think is powerless." After that, the messages stopped. The pressure lifted. Life didn't return to normal for them. It couldn't, but the relentless cascade of disasters slowed. They'd been marked, and the mark was permanent. In a just world, I thought, that would have been enough. But this isn't about them. Not really. This is about me and what I learned in the aftermath. I learned that I was never powerless. Not when they poured wine on my head. Not when they recorded it and laughed. Not when the world watched and judged. I had always been powerful. I just hadn't known it yet. I learned that dignity isn't something people can take from you. It's something you carry inside yourself, and no amount of public humiliation can touch it unless you let it. I learned that love, real love, isn't about grand gestures or romantic words. It's about someone watching from a car every night you work because they refuse to let you be alone, even when you've asked them to stay away. And I learned that consequences matter. That the world doesn't always punish cruelty, but sometimes, if you're lucky, if you're loved, someone will. I didn't watch the apologies when they went live. I didn't read the articles dissecting them, didn't scroll through the comments debating their sincerity. Jayu had offered to show me, and I'd said no. "They're not for me," I'd told him. "They're for themselves." He'd nodded, kissed my forehead, and left it alone. I spent the first week after everything happened in a kind of fog. I slept more than I had in months. I ate meals Jayu made for me, simple things, soup and rice and tea, and didn't argue when he insisted I rest. My body needed it, so did my mind. But by the second week, the fog started to lift, and with it came questions I'd been too tired to ask before. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked one evening. We were sitting on the balcony overlooking the Potomac, the city glowing soft and gold in the distance. "About what you do, who you are." Jayu was quiet for a long time. Then, "Because I wanted you to love me for who I am when I'm with you, not for what I am when I'm not." "But it's the same person." "Is it?" He looked at me, his expression unreadable. The man who makes you breakfast and holds you while you sleep, is he the same man who makes people disappear when they cross lines they shouldn't cross? I thought about that. I don't know, are you? I don't know either, he admitted. But I know that when I'm with you, I'm the person I want to be, and that's enough. I reached for his hand, laced my fingers through his. You didn't make them disappear. No, I made them face consequences. He paused. There's a difference. Is there? Yes, disappearing is erasure. Consequences are education. I wasn't sure I agreed, but I didn't argue. I was too tired to argue. Too tired to parse the ethics of what he'd done, to decide if it was justice or revenge or something else entirely. I don't want to be the reason you do things like that, I said after a while. You're not, they are. Their choices, their cruelty. You didn't make them pour wine on your head, Tandy. You didn't make them record it and laugh. They did that. I just made sure they understood what it cost. And what did it cost you? He looked away, toward the city. Nothing I wasn't already paying. The baby was born in March, on a cold morning when the cherry blossoms were just starting to bloom along the tidal basin. A girl, 7 pounds, with my eyes and Jayu's quiet intensity. We named her Grace. I held her in the hospital room while Jayu sat beside the bed, his hand resting on my shoulder, and thought about how strange it was that something so beautiful could come from a year so full of ugliness. She's going to ask questions someday, I said softly, watching Grace's tiny fingers curl around my thumb. About you, about what you do. I know. What will you tell her? The truth, he said, that I protect the people I love, that I don't apologize for that, and that she gets to decide what kind of person she wants to be. I looked up at him. You make it sound so simple. It is simple. He leaned down, kissed the top of Grace's head. Love isn't complicated, people are. We're almost at the end. If this story moved you, subscribe now. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. 2 years later, I stood in the same bar where everything had started. It looked different now, new management, new Dacre, a different name above the door, but the bones were the same. I recognized the bar top, the layout of the tables, the view of the water through the windows. I'd walked past this place 100 times since that night and never gone in, until today. I wasn't sure why I'd come. Maybe to prove to myself that it didn't have power over me anymore. Maybe to close a chapter that had stayed open too long. Maybe just because Grace was with her grandmother for the afternoon and I had time to kill before picking her up. I sat at the bar and ordered a sparkling water. The bartender, a young guy in his 20s, probably new, smiled at me and said, "First time here." "No," I said. "I used to work here." "Oh yeah, when?" "A long time ago." He nodded, moved on to another customer. I sat there for a while, watching people come and go, listening to the low hum of conversation and clinking glasses. It was just a bar. Just a place where people came to unwind after work, to laugh with friends, to forget about their lives for a few hours. There was nothing special about it, nothing worth holding on to. I finished my water, left a generous tip, and walked out into the early spring sunshine. The air smelled like cherry blossoms and river water and the promise of something new. My phone buzzed, a text from Jayu, "How are you?" I typed back, "I'm good, really good." And I meant it. Jayu had asked me once, a few months after everything settled, if I regretted any of it. The job, the humiliation, the viral video, the cascade of consequences that followed. "No," I'd said, surprising myself. "I don't." "Why not?" "Because I learned something." "What?" "That I was never powerless. I just thought I was." He'd smiled at that. "You were always powerful, Tandy. You just needed the world to catch up." I thought about that now as I walked along the waterfront, the sun warm on my face. I thought about the girl I'd been 2 years ago, young, uncertain, trying so hard to prove I didn't need anyone. I thought about the woman I was now, a mother, a wife, someone who'd survived public humiliation and come out the other side not broken, but refined. I thought about Garrett and Owen and Brett and Brooke, wherever they were now. I hoped they'd learned something. I hoped they'd grown. But even if they hadn't, it wasn't my responsibility anymore. I'd carried their cruelty long enough. Now I was carrying something else. Grace's laughter, Jayu's quiet love, the knowledge that I belonged to myself first and the world second. I stopped at a bench overlooking the Potomac and sat down, pulling out my phone. I opened my notes app and started writing, not for publication, not for anyone else, just for myself. They thought they could pour a drink on me and walk away. They thought I was someone who didn't matter, someone whose pain was entertainment. They were wrong. Not because of who I'm married to or what he can do, but because I matter. I always did. Cruelty only feels safe when you forget that every person you hurt is loved by someone, protected by someone, valued by someone. And sometimes, that someone has the power to remind you that actions have consequences. This isn't a revenge story. It's a dignity story. It's about remembering that no one is powerless and no one is invincible, and the space between those two truths is where we all have to learn to live. I saved the note, put my phone away, and sat there for a long time, watching the river flow past, unstoppable and patient, carrying everything downstream. If this story stayed with you, you're not alone. Subscribe for more stories that matter. Hit that like button. Share this with someone who needs to remember their worth. Because in the end, that's what this story is really about. Not revenge, not power, but the unshakable truth that everyone deserves dignity and no one gets to take that away. Thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next one.